So we're in the middle of the third chapter of Sotah, and she's drunk the water, either before or after the sacrifice is brought. We're not sure, but she's drunk the water. And the Mishnah continues, Eina maspeket lishtot ad shepaneha morikot ve'eineha boltot vehi mitmale gidim vehein omrim hotziuha shelo tetamet ha'azara. As soon as she's drunk, right as soon as she's drunk, her face goes green, her eyes bulge out, and her veins stick out. And they say, Hotsiyuha, they say, get her out. Before she makes the courtyard tameh. You can't have a dead body in the courtyard. Very interesting. This part of the Mishnah reminds us about the Kohen who stabbed his fellow Kohen in the heart while racing to be the first to do a mitzvah. Really extraordinary confusion of values. And in the same kind of way, by the way, and the Gemara criticizes at this point, the father comes out and says, don't worry, he's still alive, the knife isn't tameh. So at this point, they say, get her out. Let's not make the courtyard tameh. Really, really interesting statement about their scale of values. And the Mishnah continues, if she had merit, this would defer it. So maybe she'd given some tzedakah, maybe she learned Torah, maybe she had other mitzvot she's completed. So if she had a zuchut, then the punishment will be deferred. This is really interesting because the sages must have known that the water doesn't work. They must have known physically. The bitter waters don't kill you. There's nothing in water that can. There's nothing in the water that can make your face go green like this. Even if you have been with another man, it can't work it. So they must have had experience with people that they knew were guilty and yet did not react in this way. So the Mishnah says, if she had merit, this will defer it. As it explains why not everybody blew up with green face and eyes bulging out and veins protruding as the Mishnah predicts. And the Mishnah continues, Yesh zechut tolah shana achat, some merit would defer it for a year. Yesh zechut tolah shtei shanim, some merit would defer for 2 years. Yesh zechut tolah shalosh shanim, some would defer it for 3 years. So we're talking a long time here. And Ben Azai now makes a comment about education. Mikan amar Ben Azai chayav adam lelamed et bito Torah. From this, Ben Azai said a person is obligated to teach his daughter Torah. So he has to teach her Torah. Is it so that she would have a zechut? No, that's not his reason at all. She'im tishte teda shehazchut tolala. So if she drank, she would know that the merit is deferring the punishment. In other words, for Ben Azai is not anxious about her body making the courtyard tameh. Ben Azai is worried that if she knows she's guilty and she drinks, and she hasn't learnt this Mishnah, she hasn't learnt Torah, then the whole system of Jewish thought, the whole system of rabbinic law, everything will, in her mind, be thrown into disrepute. Because we've got this magic process, but it seems to have failed. It seems to fail, and that will lead to an extraordinary loss of faith in the part of the person who is at the center of this. So Ben Azai says, you have to teach your daughter Torah, because if this happens to her, she has to understand. She needs to understand what is happening to her. So that's Ben Azai. You could say, if you like, for Ben Azai, Torah is productive. If we don't teach our daughters Torah, then they're going to lose faith. That's Ben Azai. And Rabbi Eliezer, as ever, is going to disagree. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Hamulamed et Bito Torah, Mulamdati Flute. Someone who teaches his daughter Torah is teaching her tiflut. Now, the word tiflut never occurs in Mishnah other than in this context. But so we don't know exactly what tiflut is, and that allows the rabbis a certain amount of licenses interpreting it. But the Mishnah will explain it, and the Gemara will explain it. Rabbi Yoshua Rabbi Yoshua says a woman would rather have one kav, that means an income of one kav of corn a week, and tiflut, rather than 9 kavs and chastity. Tiflut is opposed to chastity. She'd rather have a small income and tiflut rather than a large income and chastity. And maybe now we should just jump and jump into the Gemara, because that will really help us to find tiflut. Amar Rabbi Abahu, my Tama de Rabbi Eliezer. Abahu gave Rabbi Eliezer's reasoning. Dichtiv, he quotes now Proverbs, it's 8:12. Ani chochma shachanti orma. I, wisdom, I live in guile. This is wisdom personified. I live, ani chochma, I am wisdom, shachanti chochma. I live in guile, I find out knowledge of deception. Kivan shenichnasa chochma ba'adam, nichnasa imo ar mumit. As soon as wisdom came to mankind, so did deception. Rabbi Abahu is saying, learning Torah teaches us to deceive. If we learn Torah at high level, we can deceive even better. So let's go back to our Mishnah now. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Hamalamedet Bito Torah Molamda Tiflut. Rabbi Eliezer says someone who teaches his daughter Torah is teaching her Tiflut. He's saying someone who teaches his daughter Torah is essentially teaching her to sleep around. He's teaching her, look, you can get around the borders of the Sotah by giving a bit of tzedakah, and you'll have a right, you'll have some zechut, and the punishment is going to be deferred. Maybe you carry on giving tzedakah, the punishment carries on being deferred. If you teach your daughter Torah, you're teaching her how to get away with stuff. That's essentially Rabbi Eliezer. And in fact, he firms up in the Yerushalmi on this particular Mishnah by declaring, Yisrafu divrei Torah ve'al yimseru lanashim. May words of Torah be burnt and not delivered to women. It's an incredibly strong statement. I mean, can you imagine burning a Sefer Torah? Rabbi Eliezer is saying it's better to burn the words than teach them to women. And he's for Rabbi Eliezer, you teach Torah to women, and you're essentially teaching her. Maybe whether you're polluting the Torah or polluting the women is not clear, but you're teaching her you're teaching her wickedness and cunningness. And Rabbi Yoshua used to say, just finishing the Mishnah, Hu haya omer chasid shoteh ve'rasha arum, a foolish chasid or a cunning wicked person. This is the word the Gemara uses, associates with wisdom, arumumiyut. When wisdom came to mankind, so did arumumit, and a rasha arum, a cunning wicked person. Isha prusha, a female who separates, maybe who's chaste. Makot prushin, the blows of the separatists. Hare elu mechale olam. These just bring destruction on the world. Interestingly, the Maimonides, I mean, the Gemara clearly has trouble with this Mishnah, because its first comment is tiflut salkadatcha. Tiflut, how can you say such a thing? It's a shocking statement to say that your teaching daughter Torah essentially makes her sleep around. And the Rambam can't deal with this. Maimonides can't deal with this, and he retranslates tiflut against the Peshat, against the simple meaning of the Mishnah, and against the Gemara to mean something a little bit more gentle, to mean something like nothingness or stories. Here's his commentary, V'amru melamdati flutu divrei havai v'divrei mishalem. They said, teaching her tiflut, meaning words of nothingness and stories. And this is, and he, unfortunately, I mean, we don't hold like the Rambam today. We do teach our daughters Torah. So we don't, at least in our community, we teach our daughters Torah. Unfortunately, I mean, well, interestingly, unfortunately, hard to say, perhaps also in response to the environment in which he lived. Remember that the Rambam is living in a Muslim environment. And he actually rules according to Rabbi Eliezer, but retranslating the Mishnah. He says that the sages command that a person shouldn't teach his daughter Torah, because women's minds aren't attuned to study. And motziot divrei Torah divrei havai, they turn words of Torah into words of nothing. So we can see he's retranslating the Mishnah here. He's retranslating tiflut as nothingness. Lefi anyut da'atam, because of the poverty of their intellect. And, I said we don't rule according to Maimonides now. Of course, there are some communities who do rule according to Maimonides. And in general, there are many Haredi communities who really don't educate their daughters. And, when they go there, they might teach them halakha, but they won't give them a book. They wouldn't give them a Shulchan Aruch with commentaries to learn out of. Even the halachot they're obliged to keep. And maybe that is connected to the place of women in society. That we can just imagine that if a woman, if you expect your daughter to remain sequestered in society, perhaps it's safe not to teach her Torah, to follow Rabbi Eliezer. But we could also imagine, and this is basically the Haredi world, but we could also imagine that if you expect your daughter to go out into the world to be a doctor or a lawyer or a businesswoman, or a headmistress of a school, if you expect your daughter to go out into the world, at that point, she needs Ben Azai, she needs Torah as protection. And yes, perhaps there are risks in teaching Torah. There are probably risks in teaching men just as much as there are risks in teaching women. But the risks of not teaching the Torah, of course, are much greater.